She walked like she wasn't waiting to be noticed, like she had passed through too many eyes without expecting warmth. There was something quiet and raw in that gait, like someone who had once burned too brightly and now chose a steadier dim. He noticed her long before she noticed him, and even then, it wasn't because he did anything impressive. In fact, the first time she truly saw him, he was on the ground, swearing under his breath because he had dropped his damn coffee all over a bench and part of her shoe. It was a mild April afternoon, just far enough into spring that Boston's harsh edges softened into possibility. Tyler, 22, a last semester senior at Emerson, was waiting for a friend who never showed. The park near Beacon Hill was halfway between pretense and decay, with just enough luxury to make it bearable and just enough graffiti to remind you it wasn't invincible. He wasn't the type to people watch, but boredom had its own gravity, and when she passed the first time, he'd barely looked up. The second time, he couldn't stop. Not because she was glamorous, she wasn't. Not because she was young, she wasn't. It was because she moved with a kind of broken confidence, a contradiction that made no sense until he saw her again, closer this time, when she paused at the bench. "Great," she muttered, lifting her foot to inspect the coffee splash. Her tone was dry, not angry, like someone too tired to be annoyed anymore. "I'm sorry, I didn't." "Yeah, that's my fault," he said quickly, fumbling with a handful of napkins that felt like they'd been compressed in his backpack since freshman year. He handed them to her with the same caution a rookie might offer a peace treaty in a war zone. She took them, glanced at his face, and said nothing. Just wiped the edge of her shoe, sat down, and exhaled like life had been leaning on her since Tuesday. He watched her out of the corner of his eye, trying to place her not in terms of who she was, but how. Her hair was tied back without vanity, a few strands graying unapologetically near her temples. Her blazer was expensive but crumpled like she'd been wearing it too long. The lines near her mouth weren't deep, but they spoke. And the small scar near her collarbone, barely visible when she tilted her head, seemed to him more intimate than anything you could show on purpose. She didn't look at him again, but she didn't leave either. "You all right?" he asked, less out of concern and more out of habit. He didn't expect a real answer, not from someone who looked like she'd forgotten how to give them. She didn't reply for so long he thought she hadn't heard him. Then, finally, she said, "What makes you think I wouldn't be?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "You just look like you've had one of those weeks. Or months. Maybe a couple years." She turned to him slowly, like peeling back a curtain she hadn't meant to draw. Her expression wasn't defensive, it was surprised. As if no one had been honest with her in a very long time, and she didn't know how to take it. "That obvious?" Tyler gave a half-smile, leaning back, watching the trees. "Not really. Most people would probably think you've got it all together. I don't know. You seem real." A silence stretched between them, one that felt neither awkward nor heavy, just long enough to let the moment land. Then something shifted in her mouth, a twitch, then a full curve, the kind of smile that fights its way through rust. "Not polite. Not flirty. Just true. That's the first honest compliment I've had in years," she said. "Which is sad. But I'll take it." He nodded, like it was a pact. "I'm Tyler." She looked at his outstretched hand like it was a peculiar object. Then she took it. Her grip was firm, no nonsense. "Eva. Nice to meet you, Eva. Sorry again about the coffee." "Could have been worse," she said, standing up. "At least it wasn't hot." She walked away before he could think of something clever to say. But not without glancing back, just once, her face unreadable. He sat there, letting the air settle, trying to ignore the pulse in his chest. It was ridiculous, really. She was clearly older, by how much, he didn't know. Twice his age? Almost. She probably had a husband, or kids, or a schedule packed with decisions that mattered. Still, something had sparked, and not the cheap kind. Not lust, not novelty, not even curiosity. It was something older, something that moved sideways through the bones, a recognition. The next day, he went back to the same park bench, early this time. He waited with no plan. And when she showed up, walking slower, coffee in hand, no splash this time. She stopped in front of him without needing a reason. "You here for the ambience," she said, "or to spill more drinks?" He smiled. "Bit of both." She sat down. This time, closer. She reached into her bag as if searching for something else, but when she pulled out a small notebook, leather-bound, clearly worn, she held it for a second, then handed it to him without looking directly at his face. "Don't know why I'm doing this," she muttered. "I haven't shown this to anyone in years." He opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten sketches, small, short lines, observations, flashes of thoughts like lightning. Not poems, exactly. Not diary entries. Just pieces of someone real. "These are good. Really good," he said, genuinely stunned. She glanced at him quickly, like she didn't believe it. He turned a page. "Some people wear silence like a scar, they want you to ask, but they never want to answer." "That's you, isn't it?" She didn't reply. But when she smiled again, really smiled this time, it wasn't broken. It was whole. And it hit him then, she hadn't been alive in a while. Not like this. And somehow, just by showing up, by being flawed, by not knowing what the hell he was doing, he'd reminded her that she could be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep this going. The way she spoke changed in the days that followed, not in tone or vocabulary, but in trust, like someone loosening a grip they'd forgotten they had. He learned quickly that she didn't volunteer anything unless she thought you'd respect it, and when she did share, it was rarely with an introduction. Tyler didn't push, he just stayed, showing up where they'd meet now regularly, never asking what it meant, never calling it anything. At 22, he didn't have a fixed image of his life yet, which made it easier to let something unexpected grow into the middle of it. Eva never said how old she was, and he never asked. The math didn't matter. What mattered was that when she looked at him, it wasn't with amusement or caution, it was with curiosity. That made it real. She worked in architecture, something he learned only after she corrected him on a historical detail about a church they passed walking downtown. "I designed the expansion on that building 2 years ago," she said, offhand, as if she hadn't just dropped a clue that required a dozen follow-up questions. When he looked surprised, she added, "I don't like talking about work outside of it. There's always someone trying to either ask for free advice or impress me with something they read in a design blog. You're not that kind of person, so I don't mind." She was used to being asked questions that weren't really questions, only strategies to get closer. Tyler's way was different. He didn't want to extract anything from her. He just wanted to see what happened next. But seeing each other was still an exercise in balance. They avoided places too central, too familiar. On campus, Tyler kept things vague. He told friends he'd been meeting someone, left the gender unclear, let their assumptions do the rest. Eva was more deliberate. She used a separate number, only messaged him from a private email. When he asked if she was hiding something deeper than age, she said, "You don't survive in a field like mine without learning when to keep your life airtight." He didn't argue. He knew she had been through something, maybe a divorce, maybe worse, but he didn't dig. She gave what she gave, and he didn't pretend to be entitled to more. Still, pressure creeps in where silence lives too long. One afternoon, Tyler was sitting on the back steps of a small building off Tremont Street, waiting for Eva, when he saw two classmates from his media ethics seminar cross the sidewalk. They didn't recognize him at first, but then one of them stopped, pointed, and said, too loud, "Hey, aren't you the guy who TA'd for Kessler's course last year?" He gave a quick nod, brushing it off, hoping they'd move along. They didn't. The other girl squinted. "You're always around here lately. Who are you waiting for?" The way she asked it wasn't curious, it was accusatory, like she'd already made up a version of the story. He stood, muttered that he was just on a call, and walked off without waiting to be believed. Later, when he mentioned it to Eva, she froze for a second too long before saying, "We need to be more careful." It came to a head 3 weeks later when Eva didn't respond to any of his messages for 2 straight days. No reply, no explanation. He didn't panic immediately. She'd told him before that work sometimes pulled her into 70-hour stretches. But when she showed up again, unannounced, at the bookstore cafe where they sometimes met, her face told him everything was different. She didn't sit. She just handed him a phone, hers, with the screen already open to a voicemail, saved and replayed so many times that the digital timestamp had blurred into the background. The voice on the message was male, controlled but cold. I heard some things I hope aren't true. I'd prefer not to be embarrassed by speculation. If this gets out, it's not just your name on the line. Call me when you're done pretending you're still in your 20s. She didn't speak until he finished listening. Then, quietly, my ex-husband's brother. He's still tied into my old firm. Someone must have said something. Or seen us. I don't know. Tyler didn't ask what the man meant by your name on the line. He could guess. Women in her field weren't given many mistakes. And being seen with someone half her age wasn't a mistake, it was a professional liability, a weapon waiting to be used against her by people who never needed a reason to dismiss her in the first place. He sat back, the quiet between them thick, not with anger but with choices neither of them had made yet. What do you want to do? He asked. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, it was measured, precise. I need time. Not to disappear. Just to decide if this is something I can keep without losing everything else. He nodded, trying not to let the burn of disappointment settle. Take the time. And just like that, she was gone again. That night, lying in his apartment, listening to the muted thrum of weekend city noise through his window, Tyler thought about how unfair it all was, not just the message, not just the secrecy, but the fact that he couldn't tell anyone about the best thing that had happened to him in months. He thought about texting her, then didn't. Instead, he pulled out a notebook and wrote down everything he would have said if she had asked him to stay anyway. He didn't sleep. The next morning, the notebook was still open on his desk. The last line read, "If they knew how we look at each other, they wouldn't ask questions. They'd shut up and stare." But for now, the questions were only getting louder. It took 6 days before she came back, not through a message or a call, but by walking into his life again like she'd never left it, finding him near the edge of the river where he sometimes read when he didn't want to be found. She stood beside him without speaking, looking at the water the way someone might stare at something they could control if they just thought hard enough. He didn't say anything at first. He closed the book in his lap slowly and waited, knowing she'd come with something that mattered or she wouldn't have come at all. When she finally spoke, it wasn't with apology or regret. It was with a kind of plain honesty that she hadn't used before. I didn't stop thinking about you. I just stopped talking. I thought it might make it easier to walk away, but I couldn't do it. I'm not trying to make you wait around for something I can't give you. But I wanted to see you. That's all I know. He stood, brushed off his hands, and faced her fully. I didn't want easy. If I did, I wouldn't have said anything the first time you sat next to me. She looked tired but clear. You deserve someone who isn't afraid of being seen with you. He shrugged. Then help me make it something worth being seen. That night, they didn't part early. They didn't plan anything. They just walked. They found a quiet street far enough from her neighborhood and far enough from campus, and they stayed close without making it obvious. It was the first time in weeks they weren't looking over their shoulders, and even though they said little, the air between them was sharp with something real. He asked her about the voice on the voicemail, not because he wanted gossip, but because it had stayed with him like a bruise he couldn't press. She said the man had always tried to control outcomes that didn't belong to him. After her divorce, he made it clear that her reputation still had value for him, for the firm, for what he called appearances. When she left the company and started on her own, he didn't follow, but he kept her under surveillance in his own quiet way. She had ignored him until now. I don't like that someone like that has access to you, Tyler said. I gave it to him. Not on purpose. But you don't always know who you're giving power to until you try to take it back. They stopped walking when they reached a building with a broken security light near the corner. The glow from a nearby window flickered. Tyler leaned against the wall and watched her study the shadowed sidewalk like she was checking for something unseen. I hate how good this feels, she said. He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. It wasn't the thrill of getting away with something or the false idea of being wanted. It was the fact that nothing about this felt forced, and because it felt so natural, it made everything around them feel wrong by contrast. He moved toward her carefully, not because she was fragile but because she didn't like being taken by surprise. When he touched her face, she let it happen. When he kissed her, it didn't feel like a risk, it felt overdue. The next time they met, it was at her place. It was small but intentional, every piece of furniture chosen for utility and comfort, not for show. Books lined 2 full walls, and her kitchen had sharp angles softened only by the scent of something citrus. She didn't seem nervous about letting him in. If anything, she seemed more certain now that he belonged in her space than she had ever sounded in public. They didn't talk much that evening. They didn't need to. When she poured wine, he took it. When he asked about the framed photo near her desk, a black and white shot of a younger version of her at a construction site, she said nothing at first, then eventually told him it was taken on the date her first solo design was approved. He pointed to the man beside her in the photo. "Was that your ex?" She nodded. "That was a long time ago." He didn't ask more. It wasn't about the past. Not tonight. After midnight, they talked about nothing in particular: half-finished books, public transport, the way people change when they're observed. She said she hated how easily people snapped back into roles, how adults tried so hard to mimic the authority they thought made them untouchable. He told her the only thing he ever wanted was to never be boring. She laughed quietly at that. In the morning, he was still there. It was 2 days later when the third problem landed, harder than the first 2. This time, it wasn't a voicemail or a look from someone passing on the street. It was a real person with eyes and a voice and a name he recognized from his program: Rita, a graduate student who worked in the campus writing center and had helped him edit a few scripts. She saw them leaving a jazz bar downtown, and she didn't pretend not to. She caught his eye, raised one eyebrow, then looked at Eva like she was trying to figure out who she was. It didn't take long. Rita was sharp. Too sharp. The next day, a classmate asked him, without context, "So, what's it like dating a woman with a mortgage and a retirement plan?" The joke was mean, not funny. It told him everything he needed to know. It had started. He didn't mention it to Eva that night. He couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he stayed quiet while she told him about a project she'd been offered, something with a museum, a renovation that could become a centerpiece in her portfolio. She sounded excited, not about the prestige, but about the chance to make something beautiful that people would walk through every day. He watched her talk with her hands, eyes clear, voice steady, and all he could think about was how much people misunderstood her, how little they saw of what he saw when they weren't trying to guess her story from a distance. He kept the comment from Rita to himself. But it clung to him, and he knew, eventually, someone else would say something worse, and louder. And when they did, it wouldn't stay private. He had only intended to stay long enough to show support, maybe help set up chairs, maybe fade into the background unnoticed like he had before, but when she walked into the conference hall in that dark, clean-cut dress with a binder under one arm and an expression that made people step aside without realizing they had, he knew this time would be different. She hadn't asked him to come, in fact, she'd barely mentioned the event at all except to say it was required, city-funded, too political for her taste, and full of people she didn't care to impress. He came anyway, not to intrude but because he didn't want to be the man who stayed hidden while she stood alone in a room that expected her to apologize for taking up space. The room filled slowly, not a packed house but enough that chatter turned to static, and everyone was looking around for the kind of faces they could latch onto, faces with names, reputations, bank ties, credibility. Tyler sat near the back, not because he was afraid of being seen, but because he didn't want to risk taking attention away from her when it wasn't his to take. The panel began with a man in a loud suit making introductions none of the guests needed, and Eva sat with her legs crossed, head still, hands folded, the way someone does when they've done this too many times to be impressed by it. When she spoke, finally, it wasn't with fanfare or polish, it was with the kind of direct authority that makes even people who hate listening forget to check their phones. She was talking about adaptive reuse, about the politics of preservation, about how cities pretend to value history while quietly erasing the people who lived it. She didn't smile for applause. She didn't pause for effect. She just said what was true. And Tyler saw heads nodding, scribbles being made, eyes widening a little too late. It was her space, and no one could take that from her. Until someone tried. It happened during the open floor segment, when questions were taken from the audience. Most of them were routine: what about budget allocations, how would zoning ordinances affect her timeline, who were her partners on the historical commission. Then a woman in a sleeveless blazer stood and adjusted her mic like she was preparing for a deposition. "I have a question for Ms. Porter," she said. "Given your recent, personal associations, how do you respond to concerns that your professional decisions may be influenced by conflicts of interest?" There was a pause in the room that wasn't silence but a calculation, people shifting in their seats, not sure if they'd heard correctly or if the discomfort meant they should pretend they hadn't. Tyler's stomach tightened. Eva didn't flinch. She leaned slightly forward, took a sip of water, then placed the glass down deliberately. "I'd be happy to answer," she said. "But you'll need to clarify. What exactly are you suggesting is the conflict?" The woman didn't blink. "Your relationship with a student from Emerson College. It's been discussed. Some are saying it could call into question the neutrality of your professional choices, especially when public funding is involved." The sound that came next wasn't shock or outrage, it was curiosity. Heads turning, murmurs rising, 100 faces waiting to see who would make the first move. Tyler didn't move. He couldn't. Eva straightened her posture, not defensively but with a kind of composure that didn't need defending. "My relationship with anyone outside this professional context is exactly that, personal. If you're implying that it has affected the integrity of my work, I invite you to be specific. If not, I suggest you return to questions that actually pertain to the project at hand." But it was already too late. The question had landed. Someone had named it. The room had heard it. And no amount of poise could erase the fact that her privacy had been taken from her without permission. Tyler left the hall 10 minutes later, not because he wanted to but because he knew staying would only give people another detail to use against her. He waited outside the venue, standing near the edge of a parking meter, watching people exit slowly, looking for her face among the stream of neutral ones. When she finally stepped out, she didn't see him at first. She looked exhausted, like someone who had spent the last 10 minutes erasing her expression in a mirror. When their eyes met, she didn't stop walking. She kept moving past the last security checkpoint until she was near enough to speak. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "I wanted to be there. Now they have a face. I don't care what they think." "I do." The air between them wasn't cold. It was worse, it was logical. The kind of logic that creeps in when two people both know what the right move is but hate the sound of it. He stepped closer. "We don't have to explain anything to people who don't want to understand." She didn't look away. "That's easy to say when the consequences don't follow you into meetings." "Then tell me what to do." She was quiet for a long time. "Then, I need to be able to walk into a room without flinching." "You think I make that harder?" "I think the version of us people are inventing is going to be louder than anything I say from now on." He didn't ask for more. She didn't offer more. She turned and walked toward the rideshare queue without asking him to follow, and he didn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because she hadn't given him anything to follow except a silence he couldn't fill. That night, he sat in his apartment with the lights off, phone screen dim, watching messages come in from classmates, one-liners and private jokes pretending not to be judgment. The thread moved fast, names dropped, speculations tossed like darts, none of them bothering to ask if any of it was true. He considered replying. Then didn't. Instead, he opened a blank page and typed only one sentence. "If this is the price for being honest, what's the cost of pretending?" He didn't send it. Not yet. She didn't contact him for 3 days, and he didn't try to reach her either, not out of resentment but because the weight between them was no longer made of misunderstanding, it was made of facts, and facts didn't bend just because you missed someone. He spent the first day answering nothing, ignoring every message with his name in it, deleting screenshots and forwarded texts without opening them. The second day he walked further than he usually did, blocks beyond anywhere she'd ever taken him, into corners of the city that didn't ask questions, just let people pass through. By the third morning, the silence started to ache in a different way, not with blame but with the need to say something that couldn't be twisted or whispered about or passed around in pieces. He didn't want to fix things. He wanted to speak plainly, even if that meant saying goodbye. It was Eva who made the first move. She asked if he could meet her in the atrium of the Contemporary Art Museum, a place where people moved quietly and didn't interrupt. He arrived early. She arrived exactly on time. They didn't sit. She stood near a sculpture of twisted steel and looked at him not like she was ready to argue, but like she'd already decided what she needed to say. I spent years protecting my name, and I'm not ashamed of that. I've worked with men who tried to cut me out of meetings I ran, who took credit for things I designed, and I survived it by staying clean, by never giving anyone a reason to doubt my discipline. I learned how to be liked without being open, and I did it because I thought that was how you win. But I've been thinking a lot about how much of my life I built by subtraction, by making myself smaller so I could stay untouched. Tyler listened without looking away. He didn't move. She continued. You were the first person in a long time who didn't ask me to perform. You didn't want anything from me except the truth, and I gave it to you because I thought I could hold both. But now the things I've tried to keep separate are colliding, and I don't know how to live in the middle of that. He didn't respond with comfort or false promises. He waited until her words stopped, then stepped closer. Nothing I feel about you has changed. And if I've made your life harder, I'm sorry. But I didn't step into your world to be tolerated. I stepped into it because you looked at me like I wasn't in the way. She held her breath for a moment before answering. You weren't in the way. But we've already been turned into something we're not. And now everything I do professionally is going to be read through that lens, whether it's real or not. I'm tired of fighting perceptions I didn't invite. I'm tired of acting like I don't care how people interpret silence. He understood then that it wasn't just about them. It was about her ability to walk into a room without defending herself before she opened her mouth. He wanted to tell her they could fight that together, but he also knew it wasn't his fight in the same way. He didn't lose anything just by standing next to her. She did. So what now? He asked. I think we need to be honest without asking each other to compromise the rest of our lives. He nodded. I don't want you to shrink for me. I don't want you to disappear for me either. They stayed like that for a few minutes, not touching, not deciding, just letting the tension between them exist without pretending it was something else. When she finally walked away, she didn't say goodbye, and he didn't call after her. A week later, a message arrived in his inbox. It was from Eva. Not long. Just a few sentences. I thought about what you said. I don't have answers yet. But if you're willing to let this be undefined for now, I'm not ready to end it either. He didn't reply right away. He read it again the next morning. Then again that night. Eventually, he wrote back. I didn't choose you because it was easy. I chose you because you looked at me like I was already enough. That hasn't changed. I'm here. Not waiting. Just here. They didn't go back to what they had before. They didn't meet every week or keep up the same rhythm. Some days passed in silence. Some ended with long calls that didn't lead to anything except understanding. He didn't tell his friends much. She didn't explain anything at work. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't flaunted. It just was. One evening in early summer, he saw her again at a gallery opening where she wasn't on the program but had clearly been invited by someone who wanted her opinion. She stood near the back, nodding politely through a conversation with a couple of developers, and he watched from across the room without interrupting. When she caught his eye, she didn't smile, but her gaze held for a few seconds longer than it needed to. That was enough. They didn't walk out together. They didn't confirm plans. But something between them was still intact, not clean, not public, but alive. The next day, a new thread started in one of his classes. More jokes. Someone reposted a photo of Eva from the conference, paired with a comment that wasn't just cruel but pointed. Tyler stared at it for a long time before closing his laptop without answering. He didn't defend her out loud. He didn't need to. The people who mattered already knew the truth. He returned to the notebook that night, the same one he had started when things were quiet and uncertain. This time, he didn't write to explain anything. He wrote to mark it. Some stories don't fit into endings. Some don't ask for conclusions. They just want to be seen for what they were: complicated, quiet, unfinished, and worth every risk. He didn't sign it. He just left the last line open. And maybe that was enough.